So this is the third video on meditation, triggers, softening, and self-compassion. And originally I was going to do it in one, but each topic got a little longer, so here we are on video number 3. And this one is specifically around self-compassion in this process of the use of meditation around triggers and resolving triggers, understanding triggers, healing, and reshaping triggers. So self-compassion. Why is self-compassion so important? So in the second video we talked about the judging mind, and a very judgmental mind tends to be closed. It's unable to see new experiences. It's constantly already reapplying its pre-existing judgments onto external conditions. And so in a way, if you're wanting to understand more, to become more wise, to have solutions to your current life and relational problems and emotional problems, being able to have the insight to see what's really going on is essential. And in video 2 we talked about how and why the judging mind blocks that. So part of softening around the judging mind is what creates a transformation. But how are you going to soften? Why would you soften, right? If you're not feeling that somebody is holding you in a gentle, loving, or supportive way, right? Because to soften is to become vulnerable. There has to be some nurturing to allow ourselves psychically to soften. And if you don't have a very loving, supportive relationship around you, or if your loving, supportive relationships only come from certain people around you or at certain times, and you haven't cultivated a sense of a self-loving and compassionate relationship, it's going to be very difficult to soften. So again, we're coming back to our relationship with self as partly one of the root things that we can nurture to allow the transformation of triggers which create hell realms that we all suffer in, right? So if you're wanting to get out of repeated cycles of triggering, absolutely structuring certain ways to get out, making choices, agreements, and boundaries, communicating with your family or relationships or between countries around appropriate ways of working with it can be essential. And yet there's also this other aspect of using meditation in inner work and the qualities or practices of being more compassionate to yourself in the context of meditation that can allow a whole inner healing space to open. Okay, and the simplest way to explain that is that you're the one who's going to be with yourself 24/7 for the rest of your life, right? So how you relate to yourself in some ways is going to affect you more profoundly than anything else. And most of us relate to ourselves through the filters that we were given when we had no choice, when we were young. So that's hardly fair. But in a way, there's no one to blame, because the same is true of our parents and their great-grandparents and so forth all the way back, right? But as an adult, if you recognize that you've unconsciously inherited this way of being in relation to yourself from people who really weren't trained and had no idea what they were doing for the most part, even if they were doing their best as wonderful, loving parents, then you understand that there's more work to be done, and that a lot of your reactivity, triggers, and personality are not your fault, right? So allowing some self-compassion by thinking that through, right? And for some people who are like, well, how could I be compassionate with myself, right? Often those people will be able to be kind to other people, right? And so then I suggest that they start there. Imagine yourself being your own best friend. If you have the capacity to be a best friend, or have your heart be touched by an act of kindness between one person and another, recognize that it is possible to have a relationship with yourself, and that kindness may be something that's worth doing if you value kindness at all. So there's several different ways in through self-compassion, and whichever way you find works for you, or however you work to create self-compassion in yourself, towards yourself, this is an essential part and a key part of being able to resolve and heal triggers. So one more thing about self-compassion, and Bessel van der Kolk, who's a famous trauma teacher, researcher, in one of his videos a few years ago, started to point this out. And I may be wrong about this, but I think he said something like, this might be the single most important aspect of healing trauma. And I have to say that my own experience through meditation and practices of awakening is that it is the single most important practice. And here's why. Very simply, without self-compassion, as parts of who we truly are revealed, and I'm not talking about the unconscious ways that we see ourselves that we inherited from our parents or from society. I'm talking about through meditation, having slowed things down, having had a whole bunch of insights into how the self is constructed, the temporary nature of our senses of self, right? And also starting to be in touch with our emotional reactions to seeing that maybe we're not this perfect self, and we're not the whatever it is that we resist seeing about what there is in self because of judgment. Our insight is kind of going to be blocked at that point. Why? Because the mind seems to have this ability to protect itself, especially the more intimate, vulnerable parts, so we don't go crazy, right? So basically, if you're judging or hating on some particular part of society, that's also reflected in some way in yourself. If you were to see that, it would cause harm in some kind of internal way. So your mind has this automatic thing to block you, right? So if you don't have the ability to be self-compassionate to parts of yourself, those parts of yourself in general will remain hidden, especially when we talk about going deeper in meditation to more refined states of consciousness and accessing fundamental principles of what drives us, actually. It can be really embarrassing as you go down in there. So if you have a judgmental mind, your mind will simply block you from seeing it. That's fine. But if you truly want to know yourself better, if you want to go on a life-changing journey, be able to integrate your parts more thoroughly, self-compassion is going to be absolutely essential, because there are parts that you're going to encounter that are like the most gentle, tender little baby or butterfly, right? And if you're running around in there with your big judgments, you're going to be crushing stuff that is essential to the heart of being able to love other people. Your mind won't let you do that, right? So there's a kind of discipline about and a practice around developing the ability to be compassionate to yourself, right? And as you deepen that practice of self-compassion, it's almost magical, and I'm imagining this is part of why Bessel said it might be key. Like from the meditation world, looking at what happens with that, it's like self-compassion itself, as it permeates the judgment and overtakes the judgment as the predominant feeling and sensation. It's like these wisdoms and revelations about being are just revealed spontaneously, right? It's like a remission of the hardness and harshness. And that happens partly through self-compassion. So I hope you've enjoyed my 3 videos on triggers, softening, and self-compassion in the context of meditation. Of course, there's a great deal more that could be said about any of these topics, but I wanted to touch on that today.